Hello and welcome to the Insights Overflow podcast, the show where we talk to customers, partners, and industry leaders about the lessons that they've learned in order to make an impact. Today I'm joined by Shawn Gradwell, who's a solution architect for complex solutions at OQLIS CTO. Shawn, how's it going?
Hi Andrew, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here.
Thanks for coming. So, complex solutions. What does that actually mean? And what does OQLIS CTO do? And how does sort of complex solutions tie into some of those offerings that Liquid provides?
Yeah, so OQLIS CTO, the C2 stands for Cloud and Cybersecurity. We are a division within Liquid in South Africa, and we have multiple what we call OpCos across Africa in different countries. And we provide not just cloud and cybersecurity solutions, but the emphasis really is on solutions. We want to understand the customer's business and see what business outcomes we can present to them using the tools available and technologies available. And what my primary function, I live within the cybersecurity space. And what I do is I try to understand the customer's business a bit better and see where we can add value for their customers. So the way we want to approach any customer is not to think about their business as our customer, but to think about their customers in turn. So that will give us a good guidance as what's important for them, how they position themselves. And again, we talk about businesses, but we should talk about organizations because it can be a government entity. We do a lot of business with government up in Africa as well. And to see just the resiliency that entity needs, the trust that entity needs to get over time from the people that live in that country. So it's about understanding what the mission is of the organization, the mandate, and again, the rules and regulations tied to that customer of ours, because that's really the starting point. What do they have to have in place as a minimum to do business in that country or to be that organization to follow their mandate?
And then in the scope of solutions that are actually sort of on offer, are there sort of particular products or sort of particular solutions that you're offering? Say you come to understand a customer, build a relationship, understand their needs. What are some of the solutions that you're actually offering the customers?
That's a good question, and I think that landscape is changing all the time. Although you have your core products like your Microsoft and all the hyperscalers clouds like Google and Azure and AWS, so they will always continue. And we would advise customers to use one or the other or to go hybrid or on-prem, and sometimes they're forced to go on-prem due to regulations. In the cybersecurity space, things change rapidly. We do have some big names like Microsoft and Cloudflare and Cisco and those which you should always have. Large enterprises have typically used those technologies. And then there's some more niche products and some of the EDRs, for example, they would leapfrog each other. This year, the one would be the best, the next year, another one would just do something better. And then the year after that, it's just really another one. So we look at them all the time and try and understand what technologies we should bring in. But more importantly for us, they should work together and they should function as a ecosystem for a company. They should be able to talk to each other, feed into systems, whether we host it as a service or whether the customer hosts it, feed into those systems, the intelligent systems, making those decisions and talk across different technologies. And sometimes a vendor wants to bring in an ecosystem that does everything. But truth be told is no one is really the best at everything. So lately, luckily, there's a lot of standard protocols, APIs, that things can talk to each other. And it's one of the reasons we like OQLIS so much is because we could create this reporting layer across many different types of technologies and we can interchange them. And maybe a customer says, oh, I'm still in contract with this thing that that we have never worked with, but we can still integrate it if it has an API. And lately, everything has APIs. It really does make sense.
I think that's also how we see it, is that I suppose the right term to use is like a customer, let's call it, has a fabric of data. And that might be ERP solutions, cybersecurity solutions, support ticketing system. And there's no sort of real one version of the truth. It's about collating all of this information in some sort of coherent, intelligent way. And I suppose in a lot of ways, so your customers are also looking to you to offer those kinds of solutions that sit as a layer over these sort of niche security solutions that you are offering. And whether you switch one out or say a customer changes year on year, they still might want to see the same thing. So it's just about changing the API, getting that same bit of data, but fundamentally reporting on the same stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's important to have our Liquid C2 document sent to the customer every month. And the one that goes to the operational team looks quite a lot different than the one that goes to the board or to the executives. But we want to frame it as a service that we provide, and we want to customize it per customer. Sometimes we want to collate data and do some intelligence on them. And many of these security systems and technologies that we use have reporting features. Even some of them are customizable, but it's really just for that system. Some of them do have the ability to ingest other feeds, etc., but it's still a branded document of that vendor. They want to, put their logo on. Nothing necessarily wrong with that, but we want control over what we present our customer, and we want to think about the technology as one of 6 blocks, just one piece of the puzzle. The other 5 pieces are governance, risk, compliance, people, process, and then technology. So when you report, it's not just on technology. There's some other things we may want to add. We've got consultants. So at Liquid C2, if I can maybe just explain that, we have governance, risk, and compliance consultants, and their job is really to sit with a customer. I think the best way to describe it is they would use some sort of a framework, some ISMS framework, some security control framework. They would ask a customer a lot of questions to try and determine what they have in place and what gaps there are, not just on the technology side. Do you have a firewall? Is it backed up? Who looks at the config, who approves it, who has access? Not just those technology questions, but people and process questions. And people can start with, how do you employ people? Do you do screening? So sometimes the reporting is a consultant that writes something and not just from a system. Now, so GRC, or governance, risk and compliance consultants, is one part of the business. Then we have what we call assurance. It's maybe the best way to describe that is penetration testing, attack simulations, tabletop exercises where we would do a test on a customer's network without their team knowing and see how they would respond. Are their processes solid? Do they respond the right way? Or just simply penetration testing or assurance in cloud posture or something like that, to make sure that what they have and what they've spent their money on is actually providing them with the protection that it should get. Because sometimes, and I've seen this a lot, where people set up stuff, but it's not done correctly, and they still leave gaps. Then we have managed services and professional services, technically more managed security services, professional security services, where, especially in South Africa and East Africa, we see a big need for customers who need a trusted advisor to tell them what they need to put in place to fill a gap and help them prioritize in the first place what they should get, because no one's resources are unlimited. Once we put a solution in place, we do the installation for them or with them, or help them or train them, and then manage it for them, provide the reporting, the assurance saying that yes, what you are buying, we've put in place and it is working. And then part of that pillar, if you will, is the SOC as a service, or really advice on a SOC, customer SOC. So you can imagine there's a lot of components, and it becomes more and more critical for business, and the language in the boardroom has changed from how much money are we making to we're worried about cyber risk and cyber attacks, because every second week there's an article out, some company's data is being breached. So it is a concern. And when I was in Egypt 2 weeks ago, I talked to them about 2 dilemmas that we have, and I put a picture on. I talked about prospective customers and customers. I put a picture on of a Ferrari Daytona 24-hour racing car that's braking at night, and you can see the glowing brake disc. And I told them that, and mostly there were CISOs and CTOs and CIOs in the audience, and I said, typically if we think about a race car, and someone would tell the driver that if you put bigger brakes on the car, it would go around the track faster. The racing driver would say, yes, that's obvious. But if you're not a racing enthusiast, it may be a bit counterintuitive. It may be not obvious, even though it's true and it's a fact. And we as cybersecurity leaders have a responsibility to go to our board and to raise the concerns and to almost sell opening up the budget to buy what we deem a priority in the list of priorities that we have. And so the one dilemma is really to translate the technology side and the cyber risk into a financial and business risk discussion, because that's a language the board needs. Reporting helps a lot with that. The second issue is, or the second dilemma in this analogy I'm using, is when the racing car driver gets his bigger brakes, he goes around the track faster, he maybe win some positions, there's a tangible outcome on the money spent. It's money well spent, there's something measurable, and they're all happy. In cybersecurity, if you do your job well and you've got the right controls in place, the result is nothing. It's business as usual.
Yeah.
So how do you then still prove to the board that the money they spent, and the stakeholders for that matter, the money they spent, the resources they gave, did a good job, is doing a good job, was set up correctly, optimally. And a lot of that work we do in managed services. But the reporting that we get out of the normal systems do not give us that report, that executive report. So again, another reason why we would feed a lot of the information into OQLIS. And we can even use some AI modules to just write some paragraphs and say, look, in the last 3 months or whatever.
Summarize this for me.
Exactly. So the more we automate, the better. Of course, we have a distribution arm as well, where we really need to optimize internal efficiencies, where we don't do managed services, really just the license sell. Based on the volumes, we can get the discounts. And that's a different part of the business, where we work with the big enterprises and governments. That is where we need to add value and show we add value. And as I say, the normal reporting that you get, yes, there are lots of reporting systems that can aggregate, etc. But we still feel there is a lack. And typically the reporting of the technology is skewed towards that technology.
Correct.
And having something independent really adds value.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to think about it. Say being in technology, you think that's the be all and end all. But rarely do you consider how it exists in the ecosystem of governance, risk, and compliance. It's not deployed in a vacuum. It affects everything else. And that brings up sort of an interesting concept for me, is to say, well, we can put in all this security, and I know, say, as an example, taking, say, like a zero trust approach, where you're logging a lot of data. How do organizations navigate the difference between maintaining privacy, maintaining security, and some sort of anonymity? How do businesses navigate that? Because if you're logging everything, what rights do employees have around privacy, etc. So how, when you have a discussion like that with a customer, what's the sort of positioning around balancing privacy and security?
Yeah, that's a very good question. When we work with our customers, of course, we separate whatever you do personally online and whatever you post personally, that's not in control of the business. But whenever the business has information about someone, for example, their name, their email address, etc., that should be kept safe, and that should be kept, it must be kept in order to authenticate the person. So you can't not have it. And the way we should look at it is the customer must use the minimum amount of data it just needs, and only for that purpose. So there are very complex systems, any system that you buy for IAM, for identity and access management, for example, any identity provider already has those things built in. You can create groups, you can, who can see the groups. And then when you have system access, and I'm glad you mentioned zero trust, because that's very much a part of cybersecurity nowadays. And even though Gartner and Forrester defines it as different things, NIST leans towards the Forrester definition of it. And by definition, NIST explains that it should accept feeds from threat intelligence and vulnerability feeds, etc., but it also should be able to send out notifications, it send out API calls, etc., whatever system you get from the control plane. It really talks about control plane and data plane. But it's an intelligence system, and if a user logs in, and make sure there's multi-factor authentication and all of that, and you need to keep the data secure and backed up, and no one can access that. But the zero trust takes it a step further, where you can now decide who can access what information, even if you have an open network. It locks it down. It's called microsegmentation. So a finance user can log into Sage, but it can't log into RDP on the server to do a Windows update, for example. So that control you now have, and as you say, you suddenly have a big database of logs where everyone accesses everything. Now, the great thing why we use OQLIS for that at our customers is we can then define which department head can log in and only see his or her department's data, where the main CISO or CIO can log in and see everything. Because you don't necessarily want the head of one department to be able to access logs from someone that's not in his or her department. So that role-based access is very important. And of course, all the cybersecurity controls around it. Don't put it on publicly on the internet. Don't push logs to a publicly accessible S3 bucket, for example, or blob for that matter. So those basics still have to be in place. And in the framework of the security controls and the normal, let's call it ISMS framework, your information security management system that you have, it's supposed to take care of all the privacy concerns around that information, or data, as we say nowadays.
Yeah, and I think, because one of the interesting things is, looking at the logs, there's a lot of each sort of user, because it logs all the traffic, there's patterns that one can pick up. And I suppose there are certain exceptions and policies around a business that you set in place. As you say, sign an employment contract, that basically means you're going to abide by those policies, be it no social media, no adult material, all of those policies. And then the only way to essentially manage the users against those policies is to log that information and flag it as potential risks or flags against that policy. So I think, so basically as people joining an organization, they're basically subscribing to the policies that the company has laid out. And then that's let's call it the privacy framework in which they would be governed. And, for the sake of the organization and the security of the organization, it's important to track and monitor and report on those aspects. You mentioned another thing sort of about systems being sort of more intelligent. I know one of the things that we've solved in the cybersecurity space, we were logging IP addresses of certain user logins. So we were basically collating data from APIs. And one of the business requirements was to geolocate those IP addresses. Now, the tools in place, they didn't have to basically geolocate these IP addresses because it was just coming from a source. So using OQLIS, we were able to write integrations into like an IP geolocator and then take that data back, write it back into the database where we could map it to say, well, these are where the threats are coming from a global point of view by highlighting it on a map. So I think to your point about, no one, say, global solution, it's about a network or ecosystem of solutions that you collate in a smart way, that you might want to integrate with sort of a random suite of other sort of, let's call it microservices to augment the reporting.
Yeah, that's a very good use case. What we do find is there is a lack in the standard reporting that you get. Sometimes the vendor would allow you to buy an advanced or elite license that unlocks certain reporting functionalities. But to your point, that system didn't have the ability. And there's another use case for that where we would have a customer's Active Directory integration, but they couldn't give us an API call to that Active Directory because it was on premises and their governance, etc. They could give us export in Excel until they've developed their side into Azure. But we could pull it into a database and we could match and we could still do the reporting based on the AD groups, which again is an interesting use case, but any other reporting tool wouldn't have been able to do that. So it gives us the flexibility also, being in cybersecurity and companies that leapfrog each other with these things, it gives us the assurance to know that we've chosen a layer of reporting that's compatible with the future. And if we get a new thing coming out, we just know we can plug it in. And also just on the back end side, if we do integrations with, say, a call center system or a ticketing system, if you will, a lot of times the integration is quite cumbersome and there's a lot of departments, a lot of governance around that in a big firm like ours. So just doing that integration once and do all the work once, now on the other side I can plug in whatever I want and immediately I can trigger input into the other system. So that makes our life a lot easier, just practically speaking. Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that the ability to go outside, as you say, with the IP addresses, it can call something from external, and it's that intelligent. And I know we talk a lot about AI. It's a new buzzword, and there's great things happening in AI. A lot of these security features have AI built in, because the data is just so much. You can imagine threat intelligence on our network is just, there's millions of these logs. So no one single person can really look and find the one thing that stands out. So a lot of them are calling it AI now, but they've done it for a long time, called it machine learning or called it something else. And what's nice is we can now decide what of that we want to send to what, and what components we want to collate. So we can use OQLIS and say, okay, OQLIS, I want this data and this data and this data, and create your own database. So it's not like it's just running a report looking at the other databases. It can actually create its own database and other databases or database types that you may want to require for speed or whatever reason, and then visualize the data. So it's more than just a nice dashboard, even though the dashboard is obviously one of the main things that we need, especially in a SOC. So the way we run our SOC, we call it a fusion center. So we have a network operations center, and then we have a security operations center, and then we have a cloud operations center. And each of them have different needs and different inputs and different dashboards and different ways of thinking about it. But essentially, our managed services does the work in terms of maintaining the patches and the day-to-day checks, etc., and the normal support. But if there's an incident, if there's an issue in any one of our customers, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's on the network, whether it's on the security side, we immediately create what we call incident response team, or the P1 war room, if you will. And having a system like OQLIS where you can immediately see, looking across various systems that collate, it really helps in determining where the issue lies. You can imagine some of the big banks, when they call a P1, it's 200 people in that room because they don't really know why they're down. It's so complex. And being part of that and knowing that, number one, knowing that it's not our fault or one of our systems we're providing, and dashboards like that, even though no one looks at it 24/7, it's really automated triggers. And finding the point I'm trying to make is the machine learning that these different systems can do, what they call AI nowadays, can then intelligently feed into OQLIS. Again, it can do some intelligence on that because the data is just so much.
And in terms of, say, the landscape of solutions, like the average, let's call it average organization with, say, 200 people or more, 100 people or more is actually sort of, in South African terms, a medium business. Like, what are the minimum requirements around security? Like, what do you have to have these days, just to sort of survive in this sort of technology world? Like, are there particular products and solutions that you would, out the box, sort of recommend that somebody uses?
Yeah, definitely. I sometimes wish that these really nice tools that the banks use and the large firms with a lot of money use is available to smaller companies, because it's just so nice to have that information. We can utilize some of those tools as a service provider to these smaller companies, saying, look, we found this on the dark web, let's take it down, which is a tool that they not necessarily would be wanted to buy, because it's about business risk effectively, and no one's budget is unlimited, and you actually want to optimize the spend. So for small firms, obviously they need the basics. It's obvious for me, but you need backups, you need identity and access management, you need a good old antivirus. It's called the EDR nowadays. Luckily, you get managed EDR or MDR, you get extended, so which XDR, which is almost a light SOC, which is feeds coming in from those endpoints and detecting if there's a breach or if there's an anomaly into a SOC. It can be a SOC as a service like ours, and then we can look at that. And that is acceptable in terms of price and the value that it brings to the customer. It's not just the big bank that has it anymore. That type of service is now available for small customers. So a lot of that we see in the market because everyone's vulnerable. But ransomware is a big issue. It's still a big issue, a big concern. And luckily, most of the backup companies nowadays have got anti-ransomware checks that they do on old backups, on new backups, while it's backing up. Yeah. So those type of things you have to...
Yeah, because otherwise you're just going to back up the ransomware.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of times ransomware sits on your machine for months before they execute it. So they know the oldest backup you have is still one with the ransomware. So I think training your people not to click on, if there's an email from your boss saying that you have to pay so much now, if there's urgency to it, if there's some sort of a crisis, just phone your boss, and something else other than replying to the mail saying that, is this true? Just phone your boss or WhatsApp, use a different medium. These practical things, because social engineering is an issue. There are firms in countries really specializing in extortion, they're training on that. And trying to get information, or trying to get some sort of a scam going in some sort of a country. And I think just, again, use your common sense. You didn't win $1 million. You didn't get inheritance from someone in some country.
Exactly.
So those type of basics. But even having said that, if someone sends me a mail from Microsoft.com, but the O is a 0, or those type of, not M Microsoft, but an N and an I, you know, I may miss that. I may not always check. And gathering intelligence is becoming easier and easier. So it might be someone that you've engaged with a lot that now again sends you a mail that looks the same, but it's AI generated. Luckily, there's cowboys and crooks, you know, the armor and the weaponry. It's always the one jumping ahead of the other, and then the other one catches up and it's ahead. So now with, say, deep fakes, for example, they're developing tools using AI to detect deep fakes, and it will then say if you get a WhatsApp and it's a deep fake or an AI video, it will actually have a label on. Those are the things that they're trying to develop just to make it better for normal people to catch these things. So I think for a small business, there's things they should have in place on the bare minimum, and it's maybe a list of things. There's also some processes that any small firm needs to have in place. And again, that's why we exist. We consult on that.
And then sort of talking about, say, leapfrogging or sort of, you know, being ahead and then behind. From a South African perspective, because you've traveled globally, you've seen a lot of things and what people are doing globally. How is South Africa faring in terms of the average organization? Are they becoming more aware around risks around cybersecurity? Are they ahead of the world, just catching up? Where would you rate South Africa currently in its cybersecurity posture?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think it's twofold. Your big institutions, your listed entities, your banks, etc., they are highly regulated, and it's good regulators, good international standards and frameworks they need to adhere to, which obviously gets them very mature in cybersecurity, and good people working for them. They attract good talent. And I work with those companies, and I'm impressed at the level of maturity they have. Up in Africa, mostly, for example, if you want to do international transactions, you need to adhere to the SWIFT framework. And again, it's a global, very mature framework. So in order to get into the game, you need to have that. So it really lifts all the banks globally. When it comes to other companies, it's really a mix and match. What I do see interesting in South Africa is that we are almost jack of all trades. I mean, I've been a programmer once. I'm now designing stuff. I've been, I've built an ISP. I've been doing so many things throughout my life, and a lot of the IT specialists in South Africa have done so much. And on the one hand, it's a warning, because now you think you can do everything. When you're the IT manager or the CIO, you think you can make the best call, and it's not always true. On the other side, it gives us a lot of breadth to think of creative ideas and to use the limited funds we have. So we've got even more limited funds than someone in Europe or the States. So over there, they have more specialists and they do things according to frameworks. Well, over here, if you're not forced to use the framework. But I think by and large, our companies, at least the ones that I work with, have the intent to reduce their business risk. And they're worried about ransomware. They're worried about those type of maybe their IP being leaked, and they would put the basics in place for that. The large enterprises basically typically have a good CIO that prioritizes, right? Where I do see in some other countries, for example, cloud adoption is slow because their regulators would force them to still be on premises. In South Africa, the cloud does make sense if you don't lift and shift, if you don't just put your VMs there. But if you would re-architect a little bit on that, maybe use the database in the cloud. So that's when it starts to make sense. Where in Europe and the States, it's just a different commercial model because of what you earn and what your people are being paid. You can actually, it makes sense to just move it and get rid of your data center because your labor is expensive or your power is expensive. I must say, South Africa, I'm quite impressed by the people that work for systems integrators, the people that work for ISPs, cybersecurity companies, very, very much on top of the game, world-class people. And they advise the normal business in South Africa. Where I see in government, there is I still have a concern where they don't necessarily know their own risk profile, and they need help. They need companies like us to sit with them and help them determine and prioritize where they need to spend their money, where the biggest risks are. And it's not across government. It's really patches that are good and patches that need help. Where in other countries we may find that the company itself knows a lot about IT. Their CIO is very knowledgeable across the board. It's quite interesting to see some countries like Egypt, for example, they would have a very knowledgeable IT team that does their homework, that work very hard in terms of trying to find out what's the best for their business, and understand their business well and make business decisions. So it is a mix, but I don't think we are far behind. Maybe on cloud adoption, because it is still expensive to just lift and shift. It's not that easy. But in terms of cybersecurity, we're not doing bad. We're not doing bad. Having the resources we have and the type of money that we make, I think we're doing well.
And as a final question, if you had to sort of look to the future and say cybersecurity threats growing, are you sort of hopeful that the good guys are going to win, or a little bit despondent that the bad guys are going to win? Like what, if we had to have this conversation in 5 years or 10 years time, what is your vision for the future as to how businesses can better manage the ever increasing risks?
Yeah, it is ever increasing, and the complexity is becoming just overwhelming. I think the good guys will always win, but the companies and the government organizations have less room to be complacent. They have less room to be naive, because attacks are becoming more and more prevalent. And I was never a guy that said, look, the wild, wild west out there, it's bad, you must protect yourself, buy my product. I've never been that guy. For me, it's about, what does your business need? What do you do in the first place? Who's your customer? And let's identify what you need, and let's prioritize and try and get the best return on investment for the money spent. And let's hope you don't employ a guy that would from internally go and leak data. Some things are just so difficult to control. But if you have the right processes in place, I always think the good guys will win at the end. I'm a positive guy. It's not doom and gloom. The software products, even if you just have Microsoft with Defender, Defender's good. It maybe wasn't that good some years ago, but now it's one of the best out there. So I still think there's space that I'm not worried that AI would take my job. I'm not worried that some system would be able to understand a business well enough to determine what's the best for their risk appetite. I really think that if a business just spends some time and energy and get the right reporting, because again, how do you prove that the stuff is set up right? How do you prove it's blocking stuff? Because you should be able to see the stuff being blocked. Because just put a Linux server on the internet with a web page and just see what's happening. That thing will get hacked immediately by bots, by systems that does it autonomously. So no, I think we have reason to be positive, because even though there's bad guys trying to get, and not just bad players wanting to steal data to sell, there's also governments in that space trying to find trade secrets from other entities in other countries, and maybe for warfare, cyber warfare, that does exist. But there's the basics that you can do to at least get the risk down to an acceptable level. And I don't think any control is 100% effective. No firewall will block everything. You'll have the guy that looks like a cleaner and just plugs the thing out or steals it, or you always have the social engineering components. But no, I think we have reason to be positive, and there's always more good people than bad people, and I think that's in general. Everyone wants to do well and wants to succeed and wants to make a difference in this world, and have a purpose. And I think based on that, the good will succeed, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you for your time, Shawn, and I'm looking forward to our partnership together.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was great. Thanks for the chat, and it's always wonderful working with you guys.
Great. You've been watching the Insights Overflow podcast with Shawn Gradwell from Liquid C2. Thank you very much.